Hi, welcome to this edition of Chuck's Culture Channel. And this time around, I've got two interviewees for you for the price of one, which now that I think of it is zero because you're on YouTube. Anyway, I'm going to be talking with former St. Louis Symphony principal flute Mark Sparks and internationally renowned concert pianist Orli Shaham. Both Mark and Orli have backgrounds here in St. Louis. I already told you about Mark's. Orli Shaham was a frequent guest here with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, especially under the reign of our former music director, David Robertson, to whom Orli Shaham is married. They're doing their first recital together on February 19th in the E. Desmond Lee Concert Hall at the 560 Music Center. They've got a program of music by Clara Schumann, Robert Schumann, Johannes Brahms, and a little-known Swedish composer, Amanda Röntgen-Meyer. We'll be hearing the Brahms works in arrangements by Mark Sparks. Now, I don't have any video of them performing together, but here are a couple of short video clips of Orli Shaham and Mark Sparks in solo performances. I think you'll enjoy them, and then we'll talk to them. Okay, so there you got to see a couple of excerpts of both of my guests today, former St. Louis Symphony principal flute Mark Sparks and internationally renowned pianist Orli Shaham, both performing for you. Well, they're going to be performing, as I said in the intro, together at the E. Desmond Lee Concert Hall, which is right behind me virtually. So, Orli and Mark, welcome to Chuck's Culture Channel.
It's so great to be here.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to see both of you in person, even if only virtually, because I've been writing about your work for years now, but we've never actually met in person. So this is a great pleasure and honor for me. Thank you. Now,
well, thanks for all those nice things you said.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, both of you, as you know,
I'm not going to thank you for the other things.
we shall not speak of that now. But seriously, folks, you have a really interesting concert, I think, coming up here with music of Brahms, Robert Schumann, and Clara Schumann, and a composer I'd never heard of before, Amanda Röntgen-Meyer. So I guess let's start with why this particular program. How did you come to put this program of music for flute and piano together in the first place? Either one of you can talk first.
So Well, I think, I mean, I'll set it up, but I'll let Mark kind of do some of the details. You know, Mark came to me, first of all, I couldn't be more excited about this program. We have been talking about doing a full recital together for what, 15 years at this point?
Oh,
So that it's actually happening is so thrilling. And he came to me with some ideas, and they actually worked really well with something I was doing anyway and exploring anyway this season. So I'll let you pick it up from there, Mark.
well, yeah, it's wonderful to be doing this, and I'm so glad that it just sort of serendipitously came together. And I've been doing some arranging of string works for uh, you know, like violin sonatas, viola and cello stuff, and for flute and piano. And I've for years I had really wanted to dig into the Brahms G major uh, violin sonata, and wondering for years really how that can work on flute if possible. And so it's been kind of a long journey, uh, but I do feel like it's really worth presenting, and so it just seemed to fit very well with what Orly is into these days, which is this whole Brahms and Schumann, Clara Schumann, that whole circle. And I've been doing some also some pieces by Karl Reinecke, who was part of that the sort of the Leipzig part of that circle as well. And that's an interesting connection to Amanda Meyer. Uh, that Orly brought up the Meyer to me. I was not aware of it, but it turns out that it works fantastically on flute, and that she was married to Julius Röntgen, and his father was the concert master of Leipzig Gewandhaus. So
Mhm.
it's just sort of a whole bunch of people who were famous at the time, and knew each other, and we're all just sort of sharing ideas and writing this amazing stuff. So
A couple of things that I really love there. One is that, the idea of having Mark play these string pieces, I'm, you know, salivating just at the prospect, because there's something about your sound. I love your sound so deeply. There's something about your approach to the flute that is both woodwind based and string based in a way that very few woodwind players get. And so I can't wait to dig into what that Brahms sonata, for example, actually sounds like on the flute when you play it. I think, yeah, that part excites me no end. And
I'm practicing. I'm practicing.
the circle of people is so interesting, and I've just been kind of obsessed with them
Yeah.
for the last couple of years, because among Clara's unsung and tremendous contributions to the music world, of course, we know that she was in so many ways a muse for her husband and for Brahms, but we kind of forget what that means. Like, for
Mhm.
example, the Schumann piano concerto would only have one movement if Clara were not around and she didn't say to Robert, "This is great, but you need two more movements." I mean,
Mhm.
it's actually a very substantial thing that means from the point of view for us of history. But the other
Yeah.
thing that it means that I had really not understood before is she created this tremendous social circle in their Leipzig home. And she was something that she kind of learned from her father, but she was so great at just bringing in the musicians who were in town and who were around and putting them all together, having them create chamber music, on the fly, and play their compositions for each other. Felix and Fanny would stop by. I mean,
Mhm.
it's kind of would have been amazing to be in that house. But that whole way in which this developed was really, it was her doing. She's the one who created this environment, who created this situation where all of these people felt comfortable coming and kind of exposing their vulnerabilities as composers to each other.
Mhm.
And that's how Brahms actually met Amanda Meyer, who was a Swedish violinist, tremendous virtuoso, one of the biggest
Yeah.
violinist touring around Europe in her day, and also a wonderful composer. And it was Brahms who said, "No, she's really good. We need to support her as a composer." So she wrote this violin sonata. She wrote a quartet and a trio and some other short violin pieces. She ended up dying quite young, and unlike Clara, she
21, yeah.
didn't feel she wasn't allowed to keep touring as a married woman. She had a slightly different relationship to, what her place in society was than Clara did. But this violin sonata is spectacular, and I actually first heard it on flute, so I know that it is very effective on the flute. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier because history has tended to neglect Clara's importance as a performer and as a figure on the musical scene before she married Robert. I think read an anecdote somewhere that at one point earlier in their relationship, they were at some gathering and Robert Schumann was introduced as Clara's husband because everyone knew who Clara Schumann was. She was a major concert pianist, and this guy is like, he's some composer. We don't know him.
There were major dedications of compositions where on the front page, it would say the name of the composer who we now would know, for example, Robert, very small, and then much bigger, dedicated to Clara Schumann, because she was the famous one. That's what was going to sell that score, was the fact that, it was dedicated to her. And, she performed that Robert Schumann piano concerto more than 100 times in her life. That was actually one of their main sources of income, was not the composition of the piece, which brought them nothing, but her performances of the piece over the following 30 years. She also was a tremendous pedagogue. She taught pianists for something like 50 years and was one of the maybe three or four most important piano teachers in Europe in the 19th century, and lasted that long. So if you think about it, the pianistic tradition that she set forth is absolutely still strong in all of
Mm-hmm.
us.
Yeah, yeah. Now I want to circle back now to the business of doing the flute arrangements of music for other instruments, because Mark, I know we've got music in this program originally written for violin and piano, and also pieces for horn and piano by Robert Schumann. So what are some of the challenges in making that transition? I would think especially from violin to flute would be harder than from horn to flute, because at least the horn's a wind instrument. But I'm kind of curious as to what your challenges are as an arranger for that.
Well, I mean, of course, the first thing you have to deal with is the limited range of the flute compared to other instruments.
Right.
Um, and, I think that you have to find ways to try to create the illusion that the flute does have a bigger range than it actually does. So you've got to work with octave transpositions and technical business like that. But then you kind of have to make sure it really works enough with the piano that, you're not sort of presenting a different piece altogether. But, I found that generally speaking, the violin stuff, a lot of composers, when you sort of find the original manuscript or the first published version, especially in the case of Schumann, was very interested in other instruments playing the pieces. A lot of these things were published as chamber music for piano and another instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't always specify which one. But in fact, in the case of the Adagio and Allegro, the horn piece has become very commonly played on horn, but it's very commonly played on cello as well, not as often on violin, and not on flute to my knowledge, but I think it adapts wonderfully for flute. Generally, you're dealing with character differences. So the flute is a lightweight, and the emotional range of the instrument is smaller. We don't have all the colors that the different strings can achieve. We don't have nearly the range and dynamically or in terms of the tessitura of the horn. But a lot of times what you're dealing with is sort of, this idea that I think composers, when they envision the piece, they envision the characters in the piece sort of operatically. And in the case of the adagio and allegro, it is very well suited to the horn. I think because it has some of this forceful music in it. And if you play it on flute, it's a lighter piece. And that's not without merit, I think. But you also have to realize it may have been a little bit different than the composer originally intended. The composers from this period did not necessarily consider the flute, possibly with the exception of Reinecke. They didn't consider the flute to be much of a solo instrument.
Yeah, there's not a wealth of material from that from that period.
I mean, and the flute in that period as well was questionable as to whether the instrument could really handle some of these demands in terms of the emotional range. Certainly the range of octaves and dynamic range as well. So, there's a lot of challenges, and I've been wanting to do this work for my whole career. I just haven't had enough time to really get into it, but I've found that's presented new challenges for my own playing, and that's been really exciting and really fun. And to be able to play this stuff with Orli, who's just a monumentally great pianist, is just, and it's just a dream come true. I'm so excited about it.
It's so interesting hearing you talk about the flute and its limitations, because when one hears you play, I've never once thought of the flute as a limited instrument in your hands. But it's actually quite similar to how I think, of my piano. We're really not a musical instrument, unlike the winds and the strings. You have to actually create music when you play the piano. It doesn't do it by itself in quite the same way. And so I think that there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, someone once said the piano just a box of hammers, basically. It's sort of
well, and we have all heard it sound that way too, haven't we?
Well, not intentionally.
I think it's a great discussion, but on some level, as artists, I think we're all trying to find what the genuine human voice in the piece has to say, and we're trying to capture just that whole spectrum of human emotion that is in the pieces, but you have to find those tones of voice on the instrument somehow. So it's always, I think, on any instrument, as artists, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to communicate this sort of range of emotion that people experience all the time and that they can relate to in the music. Yeah.
The program is music of Brahms and the Schumanns primarily. Orli, I was asked to mention and ask you about the fact that you met, I think, was it the great or something, granddaughter of the Schumanns?
The great granddaughter. Yeah. So as I said, I've been kind of exploring this Clara connection in lots of different programs, in solo recitals and in chamber music of various configurations, because there's so many people who went through that circle and who are connected. There's lots of ways to look at what she made happen. And I was playing on my series in Southern California, and I got a note, on my Instagram of all things, from this lady who said she's the great granddaughter of Clara and Robert Schumann, and she had a ticket to the concert, and this was going to be her this is a woman maybe in her 60s, I would say. This was going to be her very first time hearing Clara's music live.
Oh, wow.
And I was floored by that. And so we had her come to the performance. We actually did a post-concert talk with her, which was fascinating. The most important reason it was so interesting is because, of course, we know this love story, this Clara Robert love story it's part of the fabric of the 19th century music for most of us, right? It's one of the first stories we hear as kids. Wow, they, you know, put secret coded messages into each other and all
Mm.
this stuff. And here she is, like a living product of their love, right? Because she's their great great granddaughter, and she had that actual literal connection to this, you know, these people who we think of as too big to be human, and yet here's this perfectly wonderful human in front of us, showing us that they were in certain ways just like all the rest of us, you know, very human, and dealing with a lot of emotional uh, difficulties. You know, they had such a tough start to their life. Her father was such a character.
Oh my
It was
God,
so
yeah.
difficult for them to get together.
Well, it's
Yeah,
kind of an
and
awful human
amazing.
being, really. Comes right down to it.
Well, you know, I see where he's coming from, but he could have done it better. How about
When
that?
when you have to sue your potential father-in-law to get married, you know, it's a problem to begin with. Just, yeah. So, but yeah, you're right. We kind of tend to lose sight of the fact these people aren't just they're not just plaster busts. They're in a concert hall. They had real lives, and sometimes, and those will sometimes not leak into their music. Orly, we were talking before I started the recording about the three pieces by Clara Schumann for solo piano that you're going to be performing. Let's see, I'm looking at my screen here. The three romances from
Yeah.
1853, and I was listening to them and thinking there seems to be a lot of anxiety in these three pieces, at least in the first and last movements. There's a very short allegretto that's kind of Dvorakian, but other than that, there's this, you know, the restless triplets and all the rapid passages. It all suggests this kind of current of anxiety all the way through. At least it does when I was listening to
Well,
it.
and you know, tremendous beauty too. And I've been
Mhm.
finding as I play her music, she also did not write an enormous amount of music. She actually was very conservative herself and felt that perhaps women composers shouldn't really even write. And it was Brahms who convinced her,
Mm.
right when she was about to get back into writing again, when she wrote these romances and some of her greatest music, the music that she wrote as an adult. Um, he convinced her that she had it in her, and she should sit down and write. And so the two of them kind of competed. They wrote these romances and little intermezzi and things for each other. They both wrote a set of variations on a theme by Robert Schumann on the same theme,
Mhm.
and you know, really kind of egged each other on and supported each other in exploring that process. And by this time she had internalized so much of modern music. I mean, if you look at the programs she played through her life, she played everybody. You know, she was the first person to play Beethoven sonatas in full.
Oh,
They, before
I did
her
not
in
know that.
concert programs, they would be just a movement. She was the first person to play the Hammerklavier. Nobody had performed it in public before her. She was the first person to play the Appassionata all the way through in one concert. I mean, now it's these are inconceivable things to us because of course that's standard. But she also played everybody else, every one of her contemporaries. And because she gave so many performances, she really internalized everybody's writing style. So her own writing style at this later age, when she was a fully mature person, not when she wrote the concerto, which was, you know, when she was 16, but when she was a fully mature composer, her writing style is so intricate and deep and unusual. It's taken me a little while. You know, you want to, the same way that you would with any other composer, you have to learn their language. And
Mhm.
because you recognize the name Clara, you think, well, let me play it like Robert, or let me play it like Johannes, or, but it's not. It's Clara, and it took me a little while to begin to figure out what that is, how that feels in my hands, and how it comes out at the keyboard, and then how to actually execute it in a way that works. Very interesting. She had crazy big hands too, which is something I've had to sort of work around.
Yeah, I was looking at the actual score of the piano piece while I was listening to it, and I just kind of noticing there are some serious leaps in here.
Lots and lots of tenths, which I think mostly
Mhm.
she did not break. I don't have that luxury. I have to break the tenths.
Yeah, we should explain to people. Yeah, a tenth is well, it's
A
it's a
tenth is a
big
little bit
reed.
more than
Yes,
that.
right. Yeah, Rachmaninoff could do those things easily, but for most mortals, they're really a stretch.
Yeah, literally and figuratively.
Yes, I say this as someone who unsuccessfully attempted to play the piano in my youth. So, well, this is
I commiserate.
Well, yeah, but you do it successfully. I never really got very good at it, but at least I learned how to read music. So, well, this is great talking to both of you. And there's obviously a real camaraderie I'm getting between the two of you as we're talking here. Now, how did you two? Just my final question: how did this all start? What was the genesis of this project? The recital that you're doing.
Well, I mean, we go back quite a ways, and our connection is mostly through David, I
Okay.
think, and Aspen, and that whole scene out there. And then I think, I don't know how long you've been going out to Aspen. This is my 30th year going out there on the faculty. But I had met David, um, quite I think sometime before he got the job in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had met out there. So there, I think that the three of us feel a very common, just a lot of common feelings about music, and it just seems to be natural.
I should
I
mention
consider David
quickly.
to be
I
my
should
friend, and yeah.
mention quickly for people who might not realize it, but the David we were talking about is, of course, David Robertson, Orli's husband, who is the former music director of the St. Louis Symphony, and in fact, they met and were married during his time at the symphony. Right? Am I remembering that correctly, Orli?
Yeah, just about. We met at Powell before either of us had any connection to the orchestra. We were both making our debuts, and I'm pretty sure you were on that concert, Mark. And I think we played together in Aspen even before that.
Didn't
And
he propose to you in the tent in Aspen?
it just backstage at the tent. Were you on that concert? I think you were, right?
Yeah, I think I was actually in the audience of that.
Okay.
But yeah,
But we've been so lucky, like over the years in St. Louis we got to play together, obviously on stage at Powell, but also in smaller settings now and again. But in Aspen too, we had a chance to work together, and I think it's something that it's a classic case, an embarrassment of riches when you have these tremendous colleagues and friends where you just couldn't possibly ever run out of ideas of things you want to do with them. And the reality is everybody's so busy. And, Mark, when was at the symphony, his schedule was so crazy with that and with teaching and my travel schedule. And so it's just taken this long for us both to have the time to squeeze it in. But we're, hopefully the beginning of a long collaboration. So,
well, yeah, I had to retire to make it happen. That's what happened. I thought, well, okay, if that's what it takes, then
sometimes it is what it takes. That's great. I just wanted to get some feel for that. So once again, David Robertson is a musical nexus, kind of like Clara Schumann, I guess.
There you go. There you go.
Orli, is David still coming?
He is. I'm using my iPad, but I think I'm going to have him turn pages anyway. So yeah, he will.
Wonderful.
He will be there. We're so excited to go back.
Oh, that's great! I can't wait to see him.
When you and I rehearse, this is just a little secondary idea, but when you and I rehearse, he won't be here during the rehearsal period because he'll be in Leipzig, which is, of course, the city the Schumanns lived in. So there's your full circle coming through.
Yeah.
Again, Mark and Orli, thanks so much for being here to talk about your upcoming concert and your work together. I know there's a lot of other things that you're both doing separately, and folks who want to know more about that can just check out the video description field right below the video here. I'm going to have links to everything that you're doing. So they can always find out more. I'm going to have, a Spotify links and all that fun stuff. But I hope everything goes well here on the 19th of February. And of course, for all the things you'll be doing in the future. I know you both have very active careers right now. Even though Mark is retired, he's still as busy as he was beforehand. So
Retired.
retired, yes, or just what I say too. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for popping up on Chuck's Culture Channel. And by the way, folks, pass on the word about Chuck's Culture Channel to your friends. Share this show on the socials and the anti-socials and anywhere else you care to. And I will see you next time. Thank you two for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
Thanks, Chuck.